Okay, so yeah, we decided to write about the new bachelor program that you are going to be the coordinator for.
Program director.
Program director. Okay. And yeah, my editor really wants to somehow have Mark Zuckerberg in the head title. I don't know. We'll figure that out. But let's just get straight into it. So when we spoke earlier on the phone, you mentioned that there was a misalignment between the technical CEOs, such as Mark Zuckerberg, and between the elected officials in the American Parliament, for example. And I guess the first question I have is, would you say that that is also happening here in Denmark?
So I think both the Facebook scandal or the hearings in Congress and so on, dealing with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and so on, but also a lot of sort of IT scandals and the whole sort of what we in my field term a techlash, a sort of a critique of tech companies and so on, but also sort of public sector problems with IT and technology and so on. I think all those cases show that you can't really start, you can't lead digital transformations from Silicon Valley or from within very technical communities and so on. So when I speak about a sort of gap between elected officials, politicians, not just in the US, but in most parts of the world, and then tech companies and the CEOs and founders and engineers and so on. It's really about, a group of people on one hand, politicians who have established ways of thinking about how to deal with social and political problems and some regulatory approaches that they rely on and so on, that don't really fit the new types of developments that digital transformations create. And then you have people in IT and Silicon Valley and so on who simply start from technology and think about technology as the sort of a driver and the core of social transformations. So if you don't sort of find ways of connecting those dots in a sense, I think you're going to see these problems again and again. That if you let's talk about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. It's a company that's exploded because they have focused on technology and they've focused on building the best tools, and they've built amazing tools. I mean, this is important to remember. These are in many ways amazing companies. They've built amazing tools and they've hired the best people and so on, but it's always been with a focus on technology, building the best product, creating the best business, creating the best sorts of tools and ways of dominating the market. So if a competitor comes up, they will
Acquire.
Yeah, they'll buy it, sometimes to kill the company, kill the competitor, sometimes to integrate it into the existing company and so on. So a long story to get to the point that I think the reason why we need a bachelor's program such as this one is that we need to have people who don't start from technology, but start from questions about management, about running a business, about engaging in society, leading, having to do with people and so on. So that's the ambition of the program, to sort of carve out a space for people who are really interested in technology and digital transformations, but don't start from technology, so to speak. And this is why we integrate components from business administration, from organization, from management, from culture and communication, from governance, ethics, all these types of issues.
Okay. And so will they also get a technical understanding of how these businesses are run?
So they, at least the program sort of built on 3 pillars, stands on 3 feet, so to speak. 3 pillars. So one pillar is business administration and the sorts of, a sense of what it means to run a business, to engage in a, be part of an economy of, dealing with finance and accounting, sort of classical business school traditions. So that's the first pillar. And the second pillar is about understanding how organizations operate, how societies develop, how people act, and so on. So really sort of the sociological component.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third component, as you ask about, is really about digital transformations, about technology, about data, and so on. So it means that students will, more or less a third of the time, or a third of the studies they engage in will focus on these technical dimensions,
Mm-hmm.
but always with a sort of integration or link to some of the other parts. So they will learn to do a little bit of, they'll understand how systems operate, how you do data analysis and so on, but always with an eye to understanding how that impacts society, how that impacts how organizations operate, or how people work and live and so on.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think it's important to have this social aspect? Because I don't know. Do you think? Just as simple as that. Why do you think it's really important to have that, the ethical and the social aspect, or the organizational?
Because I think if you look at most companies in Denmark, most public sector organizations, and also abroad in many, many parts of the world, you have at the one end, in some organizations, people who are very sort of forward thinking, who know about technological transformations on the horizon, like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain, thinking along these lines. And they also, in some departments, engaging data techniques to do marketing and so on. But then if you look sort of at the whole organization, you have a whole chunk of people or parts of organizations at the other end who are really still doing things in very manual, handheld types of approaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in between you have a whole spectrum of different levels of engagement with IT, with digital technologies and so on. And what I think we need are really people who can sort of connect those types of parts of organizations and think about how to integrate technology in different parts of the organization, but also to think about where the limits of technology should be. So what are the parts that should not be digitalized or datafied and so on? Because otherwise you spend all your money going to these seminars with people from Silicon Valley or Singularity University telling you about the next tech hype and so on, and the rest of your organization is more or less doing things as they always have. So you need people who can sort of connect the dots and really sort of drive digital transformations, not in terms of technology, but in terms of rethinking and vitalizing the business, the operations, and also sort of making sure that you seal off parts of your organization or keep things that work really well without having to sort of digitalize and datafy everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And don't you think that this could perhaps slow the progression of technology if we start to censor it in a way?
I don't think it's about censoring. I think it's about sort of understanding both the potential but also the limits of technology. I think the Facebook case and so on really shows what happens if you don't think about the limitations, if you don't think about the possible consequences of rolling out something like Facebook that just sucks up data, captures everything, stores everything, and profiles people based on their data and so on. If you don't think about early on what this is going to mean in terms of democracy, in terms of ethics, in terms of trust, then you have these types of cases. So I would much rather have companies that have the competencies to think about these questions once they start installing different types of technology, rather than do the way Facebook has done it. I mean, the early slogan in Facebook was move fast and break things, because you really want to get things moving and starting and so on. And I don't think that's a good way to run a society.
Yeah. And just thinking, do you think... So I just want to get a little bit to this, what we started with, because I mean, you want to kind of connect these two aspects, right? So what is it that, why is it that you think that these politicians aren't up to date in these technical things? Like, they seem to have a feeling as to why it should be ethically under control, but do you think it's important for them to also really grasp the technical aspect of these things?
I don't think you can regulate something like Facebook or the internet industry broadly if you don't have a sense of how these companies operate, what it means to compile data and sort through data and extract value from data and so on. If you don't understand the sort of operations of a system like that, I think you're going to make bad choices in terms of regulation. So, I mean, the basic point of bringing up the sort of gap between Mark Zuckerberg and then these congressmen in their late 60s, 70s, and so on, is that there's just a huge sort of lack of competencies when it comes to understanding the workings of digital technologies, of what it means that we have entire economies, new types of capitalism that are based on data, not other types of resources. So I think you can't just sort of take existing regulation and throw it at Facebook and Google and so on. You need to think about developing new ways of doing regulation and understanding these new types of companies, because they don't look like normal companies. They are strange sort of animals, right? And you need to understand the companies, you need to understand the business models, you need to understand the whole sort of ecosystem that is evolving around data.
And but I mean these companies have been around for quite a long time, so do you feel that the regulations that have been put forward thus far are not matching what the companies?
I think in many ways existing regulation could actually work and be sort of attuned to some of these things, but the main problem has been, particularly in the US, that there's been no interest in regulating these. They've had a sort of hands-off approach and have more or less sort of bought the story from Silicon Valley that if you regulate us, you're going to kill innovation, you're going to kill the internet, you're going to kill all these amazing companies and the developments they're doing. So I think what we see in Europe, for instance, is that fairly sort of basic regulation that looks at privacy and security and so on are being sort of used to target these companies. So it's more a matter of a sort of political will and a sort of sense of what the consequences of not regulating these companies could be. And I think we're at a point in time now where that awareness is dawning on people. So we also see a sort of a growing acceptance of European approaches to regulation, and maybe that my hope is that the sort of let it all go, sort of laissez-faire approach in the US will not be the way forward.
Yeah. So I understand that our privacy is at threat, and that for example, of course, the scandal mainly began because they started using this data for political means. But I have two questions related to that. One, do you think that it should not be used for political means? Because I would assume, and of course as a journalist you're not supposed to assume anything, but I would assume that both sides were using data, so I would imagine that the Democrats were also using this data for their own campaigns. So do you think it should be completely shut off from them? Or, I mean, yeah, what do you think is the real consequences here?
I think my point is not that we should stop using data or that we should stop targeting people with communication. I mean, we've always done that through newspapers, through all types of means. But what's different about this is that it seems that people don't realize what they're consenting to when they sign up for the terms and references. So people may be willing to have their data used, and some people may not be willing to have their data used, and both parties seem to be sort of part of this thing. So I think it's mostly about sort of making it clear to people that their data are used for these purposes, and that that they have a choice. So Facebook and other companies keep telling us we have a choice. We can decide who we share with, and it's voluntarily shared, everything we put on Facebook and so on. But it's not really the full story, because they even create profiles for people who are not on Facebook. They combine the stuff you upload yourself with other types of data that they buy from data brokers and so on. And so obviously you have a sense of control on the front page. You can decide to share a post just with your friends or with everyone and so on. But on the back end, it's much more opaque. You have no sense of what happens. So I think what we need are really sort of conversations about how we should think about data as societies. Do we think of data as something personal, a private property that you as individual can sort of control and have some sort of sense of ownership over? Or do we think of it as simply a raw material out there that anyone with the means can go out and suck up and use for profit and so on? Or should we think about data as a sort of a societal resource, in a sense, something that's shared by all of us, a resource that we can use for different purposes and find ways of storing and creating access to and so on? So in many ways, the problem is that Facebook and these companies have sort of become the infrastructure or the backbone for societies by sort of creating the possibilities for aggregating data and creating profits out of data. So I think we just need broader conversations about how do we understand data, whose property should we think of data as being, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just want to maybe, because we don't have that much more time, and I just wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the program.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So first, what are these students gonna become, so to speak, when they finish? Like, what is some of the big dreams that you expect them to have?
Mm-hmm. So my hope is that a few of them are going to become CIOs, so Chief Information Officers, or CDOs, Chief Data Officers. So really people in leadership positions who are driving these digital transformations forward. But obviously not everyone is going to be that, and I think most of them are going to start out obviously entering a graduate program after this, but after that become really sort of core members of organizations who have this eye for connecting digital transformations to business processes. So they could be in the marketing department, they could be in a in a more sort of core management position in a company, or in a communication job or anything like this, but really be the ones that connected what we used to think of as sort of separate departments. You had an IT department, you had a marketing department, and so on. Those things are coming up, sort of disappearing as fixed boxes in organizations. So I think most organizations are looking for people who understand technologies and understand business and humans, so to speak. And so really sort of I think they can enter organizations in a lot of different jobs, but all of them will be the ones sort of driving digital transformations and connecting existing processes to possibilities and limitations created by digital technologies.
Mm-hmm. So if let's say, or well, not if, when they become CDOs and CIOs, how do you think they'll be able to bring about a change? Or maybe let's not even talk about when they or if they, but how would a person bring about a change in a company? Because of course companies are very profit driven, and it seems, at least right now, that of course we have the emergence of CSR and these things, but but even those are often sold as kind of marketing ploys. So how can they bring about a change within the company, keeping profits in mind, for example?
So I think the sort of students I'm hoping to develop in this program and people down the road are people who think about technology really as nothing in itself. It's only to the degree that you can connect technology to building trust or to having people be enthusiastic about their work, or customers who are excited about your product and so on. So I think making people trust in your organization, or making your employees excited about the work they do, or creating services that excite people. I don't think that's sort of an add-on. I think that's the core of running a profitable business. So, we see this in the public sector, for instance. Lots and lots of people in health, for instance, being, more or less, having such difficulty doing their work because of this new IT platform called Sundhedsplatformen, or other types of technological tools that are installed in organizations without thinking about how this is going to impact people's excitement about the work, or the patient's trust, or the users or the customers' trust in the company, and so on. So I think we see lots of examples where you simply sort of take technology as something that you can buy and install and then fix things. You'll save money, you'll become more profitable, and so on. But what you need are really people who understand from the inside both what technologies are and can do and cannot do, but also how organizations operate and how people react to change, and so on. So there's a tendency for companies to sort of buy services from outside. Have a consultant come and talk about technology, have a consultant come and offer a particular system, and then have someone come and install it for you and come and test it afterwards. And the problem is that you don't get the competencies within the organization. You don't really, once the consultants are gone, you're left with some system that you don't really know how it works, and you have some employees and some customers who are pissed off because, at least at the outset, things don't seem to work as promised, and so on. So I think we just need, people who have a sort of broader understanding of technology and its interfaces with society, with humans, with running a business, and so on. So it sounds very basic, and in many ways you would expect that these things were solved already. But if you look across public and private organizations, a lot of them are still suffering from very sort of a basic gap between technology and the rest of the organization, in a sense.
Okay, I just have about 2 questions.
Sure.
And they're both kind of broad, so we might go a little bit over time. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
All right. So the first question is, do you think that the future generation will naturally be more predisposed to connect these dots? Do you think the fact that they're already growing up in a digital age where, you bring a computer to class and you're on your phone all the time and you read about these scandals, so do you think they're going to be naturally much better at...
I hope they'll have a sort of natural interest in this, but I really don't think that just because you have spent your childhood on an iPad or in front of your screen playing games or something like this, I don't think it translates at all. I really think you need education. Yeah. You need to have a vocabulary to talk about these things. You need to understand, take something like artificial intelligence. You need to understand how the first philosophers thought about intelligence in the human mind in order to understand artificial intelligence. So I think there's we need absolutely more education, a lot of education for even for the kids who have spent their childhood in front of a computer. Another argument that we see in Denmark is that we're sort of a digital front runner. We have the best infrastructure, we have the best internet connections, we have the most household connected to the internet and so on, but it doesn't really translate. It doesn't mean that just because we have infrastructure or lots of computers at home that we're very competent at using these tools and technologies at work and in building our businesses and so on. So I don't think spending time in front of a screen or having a really good internet connection is what's needed. I think it's a very sort of a focused type of education and learning and competency development that's about understanding technology and its relations to business and society.
And do you think Denmark is doing well on these grounds, on offering these educations? And
I mean, I wouldn't have started this program if I thought the gap was sort of
too big.
Full. No, if it was filled already. I mean, if there was enough out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a business school like CBS that looks at how businesses operate in society, I think, is a perfect sort of starting place for this type of program. We have the faculty and the sort of resources needed to really create a high-profile, amazing program that integrates the best of CBS. People who work on technology, people who work on sociological issues, people who work on business administration and understanding how business operates and so on. So there are programs in Denmark that do similar things, but some of them are at the IT university and they more start from IT. We also have communication programs at Copenhagen University who have a focus on technology, but they really start from communication and so on. I think there's a gap in the Danish educational landscape that CBS can fill by really sort of taking the best from CBS management programs and integrating a very strong focus on technology. Yeah.
The 3 pillars.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay, sorry for going over here, but the last question is, so if people can learn from this Facebook scandal, and more specifically from Zuckerberg, what do you think is the main thing to learn from this mistake, or whatever you want to call it?
I think what we can learn is both the sort of how far you can get by focusing on building the best products and building a company, focusing on technology and hiring people who can help you build good services, but also the pitfalls or the problems that arise if you don't have the mindset or the skills or the experience. I mean, you got to remember he was 19 when he started this. So there are obvious reasons why you can't have a broad mindset, a skilled set of, or a sort of broad set of competencies when you do this kind of thing. So I think what we can learn is that you may be able to build amazing services and build things really rapidly and so on, but if you also want to develop trust relations, if you want to be seen as a company that contributes to society and so on, there are dangers involved in sort of moving too fast and having this one-track mind. So I think we can learn that all sorts of tech companies are going to become more focused on not just regulation, but also ethics, societal transformations, really sort of become more anchored in society, I think. And that slows down innovation possibly and so on, but it does it for good reasons and for good purposes.
All right, nice. I just want to get one more quick piece of information. Do you maybe have any examples of Danish cases that are similar to this data breach kind of thing?
I think we've seen different types of cases where different sensitive kinds of data have been picked up or placed in IT systems that then leaked or were accessed by the wrong parties and so on. And this is, health data is one area we've seen, and this, I mean, the possibility, the potential of using health data for purposes of curing diseases and preventing disease and so on are huge. But what happened in this particular case was that people's information was stored in this system. The system leaked. Lots of sensitive information spilled into the wrong hands, and Danish society, the politicians in Denmark decided to kill the project. So that's a lose-lose kind of situation, right? So I think if you can build systems that are where it's more safe, and you can promise people that their information is not spilled into the wrong hands and so on, then I think you can reap the benefits of data, and I think that's where we need to go. But obviously we can't do it at the expense of trust, privacy, and so on. So we need to find ways of sort of sorting data out where it doesn't connect back to individuals and so on. And this is why I spoke about we need to think of data as a sort of societal resource, and we need to build societal infrastructures for working with data and so on. And we need to have people have the skills to work with data and so on. And I think Facebook and all these other cases really show that these things are not in place yet. Mm-hmm. So we sometimes think of digital transformations and technologies as a way to save money. I think we need to spend a lot more money on building infrastructure and building capacities and so on.
All right.
Great.
Yep, that's everything.
So